The smoke of the Titanomachy had not yet cleared from the jagged peaks of Othrys when the three sons of Kronos stood upon the bruised earth to divide the spoils of a broken universe. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy metallic tang of ichor, the world itself trembling in the wake of a decade of divine slaughter. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, three brothers forged in the belly of a titan and tempered in the fires of a cosmic revolution, looked upon the vast, raw expanse of existence and realized that the victory was only the beginning. To prevent the very chaos they had just suppressed, they required a structure, a geometry of power that would tether the elements to their will. They gathered in the shadow of Mount Olympus, bringing with them a bronze helmet, a vessel of fate into which three tokens were cast. This was the ultimate gamble, a game of celestial high stakes where the prize was the very fabric of reality. Each brother reached in, his fingers brushing against the cold, vibrating destiny that awaited him. Zeus drew the sky, the vast electric vault of the heavens where he would sit as king, weaving the clouds and commanding the thunder. Hades, the eldest and most somber, drew the lightless depths of the earth, the silent, heavy shadows of the underworld, where the sun would never find him. But it was Poseidon, the middle brother with a temper like a brewing squall and a heart as restless as a tidal surge, who pulled the token of the sea. In that moment, the world let out a collective, gasping breath. The oceans, which had existed since the dawn of time as the wild, unmapped territory of the primordials, felt the first tremors of a new master. At this point in the chronology, the sea was not a kingdom. It was a blue wilderness, a realm of shifting borders and ancient, indifferent entities. The primordial Pontus, the personification of the brine itself, and Thalassa, the goddess of the Mediterranean surface, moved in a slow, rhythmic dance that predated the very concept of gods. The Titan Oceanus, who had remained neutral during the war, still coiled his massive serpent-like body around the edges of the world, a river of salt that kept the cosmos from spilling into the void. To these ancient powers, Poseidon was an intruder, a young upstart with a golden beard and a weapon of terrifying proportions. He did not merely visit the water, he claimed it with a violence that matched his nature. When he first stepped into the surf on the shores of Euboea, the waves did not simply splash against his ankles, they shuddered. The very molecular structure of the saltwater seemed to recognize a new, more dominant vibration. He carried the Trident, a weapon forged by the elder Cyclopes in the heat of the underworld's deepest forges, a three-pronged scepter that was part fishing spear and part earthquake generator. With a single strike of this weapon against the sand, he signaled the end of the primordial anarchy. He asserted that the sea would no longer be a chaotic expanse but a structured empire, and the first task of his reign was to carve a throne room out of the abyss that would rival the heights of his brother's Olympus. He did not seek a home in the breezy, sun-drenched heights where Zeus preened. Poseidon required the crushing pressure and silent majesty of the deep. He plunged through the sunlit layers of the Aegean, past the kelp forests and the coral reefs, deeper than the light of Helios could ever reach, until he found a vast undersea clearing near the ancient site of Aegae. Here, the tectonic plates themselves seemed to bow under the weight of his presence. To build his capital, he did not look to the masons of the surface. Instead, he summoned the Telchines, the mysterious dog-headed smiths and sorcerers of Rhodes who had once nursed him in his infancy. These creatures, masters of metallurgy and maritime magic, understood the fluid architecture of the abyss. They did not build with stone and mortar, for stone is a prisoner of the land. Instead, they used the biological artistry of the ocean itself. Under Poseidon's direction, they caused columns of living coral to rise from the seabed, branching out like petrified trees to support a ceiling made of translucent whalebone and pearl. The halls were grown from the ribbed skeletons of prehistoric leviathans that had died before the gods were born, and the walls were lined with mother-of-pearl that shifted through every color of the spectrum as the deep-sea currents moved through them. The floors were not of cold marble, but of beaten gold, polished so finely that they reflected the bioluminescence of deep-sea creatures like sunlight dancing under a lens. This was the palace of Aegae, a shimmering citadel trapped inside a soap bubble of divine will, where the doors remained perpetually open to the endless blue, welcoming every tide and every far-off current that traveled from the edges of the world. Yet, once the palace was finished and the golden gates stood firm against the pressure of the deep, a profound silence began to weigh on the king. A kingdom without a voice other than his own was nothing but a hollow echo, a vast hall of mirrors where he saw only his own brooding reflection. Poseidon was a god of immense appetites and a loneliness that was as vast as the Atlantic. He understood that to truly cement his authority over the waves, he needed a queen, someone whose nature could withstand the mercurial swings of his temperament and whose lineage would link the new Olympian order to the ancient spirits of the water. His first choice was a figure of immense poise and ancient power, Thetis, the silver-footed sea nymph and the most prominent of the Nereids. She was a shapeshifter of the highest order, capable of turning her body into fire, rushing water, or a roaring lion in the blink of an eye. Poseidon was deeply drawn to her calmness, sensing that her fluid grace would be the perfect anchor for his storms. Even Zeus, looking down from his high throne, found himself captivated by her. For a time, it seemed the two most powerful brothers in the universe might go to war over the hand of a single nymph. However, before a divine marriage could be brokered, the Titan Prometheus, who was then bound to the rocks of the Caucasus, whispered a prophecy that chilled the gods to their marrow. He revealed that Thetis was destined to bear a son who would be far greater than his father. For Zeus and Poseidon, whose entire history was defined by the cycle of sons overthrowing their fathers, this was an absolute deal-breaker. Neither was willing to risk his throne for a beautiful face. Thetis was set aside, eventually destined to marry the mortal Peleus, and Poseidon's search for a consort continued, his heart more turbulent than before. It was during a festival of the sea spirits that he saw Amphitrite, another of the 50 Nereids, the daughters of Nereus, the old man of the sea. If Thetis was the depth of the ocean, Amphitrite was its movement, the quick ripples, the white foam, and the clean, bracing wake left by a fast-moving ship. She possessed a beauty that was not just visual but felt like the breath of a fresh gale. Poseidon, never one for subtlety or patience, declared that she would be his queen, expecting her to be honored by the selection. But Amphitrite was not a prize to be collected or a domestic decoration to be kept in a golden cage. She was an immortal with a profound love for the unmapped freedom of the open ocean and a healthy fear of the god's legendary temper. She did not want to manage the moods of a deity who could drown a coastline on a whim. In an act of defiance that surprised the court of the deep, she fled. She swam with all her strength toward the very edge of the world, seeking refuge at the foot of the Atlas Mountains where the great Titan held up the sky. Here, in the dark, cold depths of the Atlantic where the sun barely reached, she hoped to disappear into the anonymity of the currents. Poseidon was wounded by the rejection, and his anger caused the sea to boil and the earth to groan. But rather than pursuing her himself, perhaps realizing that his presence was too loud and forceful for such a delicate negotiation, he sent a fleet of searchers into every trench and cavern. Among them was Delphinus, a spirit who moved with the easy, playful diplomacy of a dolphin. While the other searchers tried to hunt her down like prey, Delphinus found her seated among the jagged rocks of the deep Atlantic, gazing out at the vastness of the unexplored. He did not try to seize her or threaten her with Poseidon's wrath. Instead, he spoke to her with a charm that was sincere and a logic that was undeniable. He painted a picture of a partnership, telling her that the sea needed a mother as much as a father, and that Poseidon's power, when tempered by her wisdom, could bring a new era of stability to the waves. He convinced her that being queen was not a cage but a platform from which she could rule the very currents she loved. His persistence and gentleness eventually caused her to relent. She returned with him to Aegae, and the wedding that followed was a spectacle that the world would never forget. Poseidon was so moved by the loyalty and tact of his messenger that he lifted Delphinus from the water and placed him among the stars, creating the constellation of the dolphin so that every sailor for all of time would see the creature that brought peace to the king's heart. Amphitrite took her place on the throne of pearl and proved to be the steadying counterweight the ocean required. She was the loud moaning queen who could soothe the swells that her husband stirred up in his anger. Together, they peopled the sea with a new generation of divinity that gave the ocean its distinct character. Their most famous son was Triton, the trumpeter of the deep. Triton was a creature of two worlds, depicted as a merman, half man and half fish, whose scales shimmered with the colors of a storm-tossed sea. He carried a twisted conch shell, a gift from his father, that served as the herald's horn for the entire maritime world. When Triton blew through the shell, the sound was so powerful it could calm the wildest hurricane or make the very foundations of the earth tremble. He was the enforcer of his father's will, the one who patrolled the boundaries of the kingdom and announced the arrival of the King of the Seas. Then there was Rhode, a goddess of such radiant presence that she became the namesake and protector of the island of Rhodes, eventually marrying the sun god Helios in a union that wedded the light of the sky to the depths of the water. They also had Benthesisine, whose name means deep wave, a goddess who moved through the lightless abyss and would later act as a foster mother to Poseidon's many children, raising them in the secret safety of the trenches where even the other gods could not find them. However, the establishment of Poseidon's kingdom was not merely a matter of building palaces and fathering heirs. It was a political struggle against the remaining forces of the old world. While Zeus was busy organizing the Olympian pantheon, Poseidon had to contend with the remnants of the Titan regime and the primordial monsters that still lurked in the narrow straits. One of his greatest early challenges was the consolidation of his title as Enosigaios, the Earthshaker. The ancients believed that the land floated upon the sea like a piece of wood, and Poseidon took it upon himself to prove that he held the reins of both. He would drive his golden chariot across the surface of the water, the dolphins leaping in his wake and the waves smoothing out beneath his wheels as if they were a paved highway. But when his mood darkened, he would plunge his trident into the seabed, sending shock waves through the crust of the world. He used this power to carve out new islands, to sink cities that failed to offer him proper sacrifice, and to create the very geography of the Mediterranean. He claimed the horses of the world as his own, inventing the animal from the spray of a breaking wave during a contest with Athena, and he became the patron of the gallop and the charge. This connection between the wild, unbridled energy of the horse and the relentless power of the sea became a hallmark of his worship, signifying a god who could not be tamed by walls or treaties. Despite his marriage to Amphitrite, Poseidon's passions remained as volatile as the weather. His desires often tugged at him like dangerous undertows, leading to the darker, more monstrous chapters of his reign. One of the most enduring tragedies of this era was the story of Scylla. In her original form, Scylla was a nymph of breathtaking beauty, a young woman who spent her days on the beaches of southern Italy, her presence feeling like the quiet, sun-dappled side of a cove. She was bright and clean, and unfortunately for her, she caught the eye of the King of the Sea. Poseidon became infatuated with her, his desire rising like a spring tide that threatened to overwhelm her. There are conflicting accounts of what happened next, each revealing a different facet of the divine ego. In some traditions, Amphitrite, despite her usual calm, was struck by a jagged spear of jealousy. To protect her marriage and punish the girl who had caught her husband's eye, she sought out a secluded pool where Scylla frequently bathed. Amphitrite, skilled in the ancient magics of the deep, brewed a concoction of fermented sea venom and poisonous herbs. She slipped the potion into the crystal-clear water, and when the unsuspecting Scylla stepped into the pool to refresh her limbs, the transformation was instantaneous and horrific. The water began to boil with dark magic, and from Scylla's waist erupted 6 long serpentine necks, each ending in a head filled with triple rows of shark-like teeth. 12 misshapen feet grew where her graceful legs had been, and her voice, once like music, turned into a yapping, terrifying bark that sounded like a pack of starving dogs. However, the poet Ovid provides a more complex layer to this myth, one that involves the transition of mortals into the divine. He tells of Glaucus, a humble fisherman from Boeotia who discovered a magical herb on a deserted shore, grass that had been touched by the blood of the Titans during their fall. Upon eating the grass, Glaucus found himself transformed. His hair turned the color of seaweed, his chest broadened, and his legs merged into a powerful, scaly tail. He became an immortal sea god, but he retained the yearning heart of a man. He fell deeply in love with Scylla, but the girl was repulsed by his alien, fishy form and fled into the hills whenever he approached. In his desperation, Glaucus sought the help of the sorceress, Circe, asking her for a love potion. But Circe, seeing the devotion in Glaucus's eyes, decided she wanted him for herself. When he rejected her, saying he would love Scylla as long as the trees grew leaves, Circe directed her spite at the innocent nymph. She was the one who poisoned the water, turning Scylla into the multi-headed terror of the Strait of Messina. Regardless of who held the poison, the result was the same. The sea gained a permanent guardian of the rocks, a creature who would snatch 6 sailors from every ship that passed, serving as a grim reminder that in Poseidon's realm, beauty and danger are 2 sides of the same coin. Opposite Scylla lay Charybdis, another of Poseidon's creations, though her origin was rooted in the god's constant friction with his brother Zeus. Charybdis was originally a daughter of Poseidon and Gaia, a loyal servant of her father who helped him in his territorial disputes with Zeus. She would flood the lands to expand Poseidon's kingdom, reclaiming the earth for the water. Zeus, furious at her interference, struck her with a thunderbolt and cursed her to live forever at the bottom of the sea. There she became a sentient whirlpool, a massive maw that drank the ocean 3 times a day and spat it back out in a churning, violent vortex. Together, Scylla and Charybdis created a gauntlet that every hero and merchant would eventually have to face, a physical manifestation of the sea's intolerance for those who did not respect its power. Poseidon did not view these monsters as abominations. He viewed them as part of the ecosystem of his reign. They were the sentinels of his borders, the enforcers of the wine-dark law. As the centuries of the early divine age progressed, Poseidon's authority became absolute. He was the god of the Great Green, the master of the storms that could swallow fleets, and the protector of the coastal peoples who lived in constant fear and awe of his trident. He established the Isthmian Games in his honor, a festival that celebrated both the strength of the athlete and the speed of the horse, tying the culture of the land to the rhythm of the tides. His kingdom was a world of submerged suns and mother-of-pearl, a place where the children of the king, the Nereids, the Tritons, and the sea spirits, shaped the very currents that led to the ends of the earth. He sat on his golden throne in Aegae, his queen Amphitrite beside him, watching as the world above began to populate with heroes and kings. He knew that their ships would eventually come, that their prayers would rise like incense through the waves, and that their lives would depend entirely on the whim of his trident. He had transformed the chaotic wilderness of the primordials into a structured, formidable empire. He was no longer just a son of Kronos who had drawn a lucky token. He was the king of the abyss, the shaker of the world, and the master of every drop of water that touched the horizon. The establishment of this blue foundation was essential for all the myths to come. Without Poseidon's order, there would be no Odyssey, no Argo, and no safe passage for the spread of civilization. Yet, he remained the most volatile of the Olympians, a reminder that the foundation of the world is not solid rock, but a shifting, surging liquid that can turn from a mirror calm to a world-ending storm in the blink of a divine eye. His kingdom was earned through war, built through magic, and maintained through a combination of terrifying power and strategic marriage. As the sun set on the first age of the gods, the sea was no longer an empty void. It was a living, breathing entity, pulsating with the will of its master, waiting for the first wooden hulls to scratch its surface and begin the age of wandering heroes.